Hey guys, Dev with Crime Hive, and we are talking about serial killer Israel Keyes, the 11 skulls he drew in his own blood, and what this means in relation to his victims. Just so you guys have an idea, the FBI released these drawings that Israel made in his jail cell in his own blood. They believe these represent 11 of his victims. There may be more. And we're going to talk about the 3 victims we know for sure that he confessed to, and then possibly a 4th that's linked to him. And then we're going to talk about these other possible cases that are linked to Israel. So the first case, and by the way, there's going to be a CBS special, I believe, 48 hours. They're going to talk more about this. So there may be more updates. If you guys get those updates, feel free to comment below, subscribe to my channel, and we're going to have more on this case as this new evidence is released in relation to this case. So first up, Israel confessed to killing Bill and Lorraine Courier. Now, this was a couple in Essex, Vermont, and what we know from this timeline here is Israel actually went to Chicago. He flew from Anchorage to Chicago, ends up driving to Vermont. He actually stays in a hotel in Vermont, which was very uncharacteristic of him, considering he would typically have a one-way flight to one place, take a rental car, drive to another location, commit a murder, drive that car to another place, and then fly back out. So he was all over the place traveling. It's very hard to piece together the timeline, but the FBI did put out information about this. So anyway, with this case, if you guys aren't aware, he shows up to their home in Vermont. He's got his kill kit, he's got a backpack, he's wearing a headlamp because it's at night. He basically breaks into their home, is able to go straight to their bedroom, ties them up with zip ties, basically tells them that it's going to be a ransom, and he transports them to an abandoned location that he'd already picked out. That's going to be important later. So there, he basically has poor Bill tied down in a basement on a stool and ends up going upstairs where he had Lorraine, and ultimately sexually assaults her and strangles Lorraine. He ended up shooting Bill with a silenced gun that he had, which was part of his kill kit that he had stashed all around the country in different locations. He would dig these up. He actually had this particular kill kit buried 2 years prior to this act that he committed. So very strategic, very meticulous, and the FBI had not seen anyone like him before. So anyway, he ends up killing them, puts them in garbage bags, puts debris over them, and this is an abandoned house. This house actually ended up becoming it got demolished, was sent to the junkyard. FBI tried to scour through the junkyard to find their remains, were not successful. The remains have never been found to this day. So that's kind of what we know about this first couple. And here's kind of, just to give you an idea, Vermont, really close to Canada. We know that he also traveled in Canada. He traveled all over, but there's definitely a record of him in Canada. He had property in New York, and we'll get to that here in just a minute. And so just to get an idea of where that murder took place right there. Now, the second one that we know about for sure is Samantha Koenig. Now, this ultimately got Israel captured because he broke his own rule. He actually murdered Samantha in his own hometown in Anchorage, where he lived. And police were able to, from that particular case, they were able to catch him. And I talk about that in another video if you guys want to watch that video of how Israel was ultimately caught, the mistakes that he made. So anyway, with this case, just to recap this one as well, Samantha was working at a little coffee kiosk. This was February 1st, 2012, and she's working alone. Israel shows up, has her make a coffee for him, and ends up basically going into the kiosk, taking her hostage, zip tying her, takes her to his own personal cabin, his own home, and basically sexually assaults her there, cuts her up into pieces, puts her body, dumps her body about 41 miles away from that location, and
and then ultimately set up a fraud. He was saying it was a ransom that for Samantha. He would, he needed. I think it was 40,000 at the time, or 30,000 that he demanded, and the family actually put together the funds to give to Israel, and Israel started making withdrawals from Samantha's ATM card. That ultimately led to his capture. Again, I talk about that later. But Samantha was 18 years old, and we know that was his third victim. So that's 3. Now there's a 4th that FBI is pretty sure is related to Israel Keyes. So if you haven't heard about her, Deborah Feldman is her name. She lived in New Jersey, and she's a 48-year-old woman, went missing. Her bank cards, all that, have not been used since. So just everything's inactive with her accounts. She's most likely dead. But investigators believe it's linked to Israel Keyes. So if you look here at this timeline, what we know is he basically travels from Seattle all the way to New Hampshire, and I'll show you the timeline here. They believe that he may have gone to Hackensack, New Jersey, where Deborah lived, and then he mentioned dumping a body at Tupper Lake, which is in New York. So that's kind of the timeline on that. And if you look right here, we'll talk about that as well. This actually took place in 2009. So right here, so Tupper Lake, New York. This was April 9th, 2009, and we know that he again went from Seattle to New Hampshire. There's records of him renting a vehicle. He actually put 1,047 miles on that trip. He was known to rent a ton of different rental cars and stay at different places, frequent traveler, and then they believe that he possibly murdered her. And now Israel actually has property in New York as well. So I think I've got it right here. In Constable, New York, he actually has land out there, and I believe he has a cabin out there as well. So it's, again, really close to Canada. And that's the 4th victim that we believe. Now, Thurston County, what I'm talking about here is Israel. Now, these are some of the other victims. So we know there's the 4, 3 for sure, 1 possible, that's 4. And then there's these other victims that are possibly out and about. Supposedly, Israel had said that he'd murdered 4 people in Washington State. So we know that he had been stopped in this county, Thurston County, which Olympia is in. He actually lived at one point in Nia Bay, and he lived in other parts of Washington as well. So we know, there's records of him in Port Angeles. We know he's traveled through there frequently. I don't believe there are any cases linked to him at this time, but that may be changing as investigators continue this new evidence with Israel and the timelines that they've created. So again, guys, lots of different evidence unraveling. If you guys have more information, let me know, comment below, subscribe to my channel, and as I get more updates, I'll be doing more videos. If you like this, let me know. And again, this is Dev with Crime Hive. We'll chat with you guys soon. Take care.